Right now we're in the middle of the Christmas season, and some of you are done Christmas shopping. Some of you haven't begun yet because you're a man and it's not the 24th of December yet. Anyway, and you buy those Christmas gifts and you wrap the Christmas gift and then you put a label on that Christmas gift. How many would like me when you were a kid and mom and dad had the Christmas tree, you went, and maybe after school, you checked, you went to the tree to find out if there was any new presents under the tree and you looked for those labels with your name on it. The one that always got me was the ones that said, "To Chris from Santa," and they always came before Christmas. Don't know how it happened. And then as I got older, I realized Santa Claus was a forger because Santa Claus's handwriting was just like my mom's handwriting. That's what I realized in that whole thing. But we need to label things because the label identifies the recipient of whatever's inside of that gift. Labels are an amazing thing. We use labels all over the place. And in fact, the mortal enemy of our souls, the devil, he puts labels on people too. And some of those labels are a little more difficult to remove. And labeling can be so easy. We're good at labeling people. All of us in this room have this tendency inside to label people. We label people as being tall, short, fat, skinny, pretty, ugly, talented, gifted, whatever the case might be. We're so good at labeling people. Let me show you how good or how easy it is to label people. This is going to be a participating thing, so you have to finish what I began. And here's some labels that we have used for people. So help me out here and see how you do on this. Like, here's one label that we know. Attila the... Oh, you guys are so sharp. That's awesome. Alexander the... Ivan the... Jabba the... I'm going to see how old you are now. Andre the... Old people here, okay. And then how about this last one? Winnie the... I know what a Hun is. Do you know what a Hun is? I know what it is to be great. I know what it is to be a giant. I don't want to be a poo. I don't know what a poo is, but that's one of those labels that has been used. And so anyway, we're so good at labeling people, and we have labels too. All of us in this room have a label. And some of the labels that we wear, other people have put those labels on us, and sometimes we put that label on ourselves. And sometimes the labels that we put on ourselves can be the most difficult to remove. Oh, all of them are hard to remove. And you know, some of the labels that we get when we're a kid. Whether you know this or don't know this, it really doesn't matter, but your pastor's visually impaired, I have bad eyesight, and so, you know, when you're a kid, if there's a weakness, people always play on that weakness. And so from a young age, I had labels, and you have labels too. And the older you get, you sometimes forget what's written on those labels until the circumstances are just right. And when the circumstances are just right, you remember exactly what was on that label. It's in bright neon indelible ink. You can remember it because there's those moments, come on, moms, even dads here, moms, dads. You try to do everything right. You come to church on Sunday, you're trying to raise up your family in the faith. But then something happens. Your children exasperate you. And in that moment of exasperation, you blow it. You lose it with your kids. And you remember the label. For some of you, when you feel friendless in the world, you feel alone and isolated and lonely. The circumstances are just right, and in an instant, you can remember what was written on that label. For some of you, it's when you get into a certain group of people. Come on, ladies, you walk into a room full of ladies. You scan the crowd to see what they're wearing and who's there. Men might do the same thing, but a little bit different thing. And when you get into the right environment, the right crowd of people, you remember the label that's on you. Either written by someone else or written by you yourself. That when you become overwhelmed with life, you don't know what to do in a circumstance. And you throw your hands up and you're just in absolute desperation. You feel absolutely helpless. You remember the label again. All of us in this room have worn labels or wear labels. And fortunately for you, and fortunately for me, there's somebody in the Bible Christmas story that wore a label too. And we're going to talk about that person. And I love the fact that Christmas is not so neat and not so tidy, that there are people in the Christmas story that had a past, that had labels. In fact, the person that we're going to talk about was, they're in the Christmas story, but they're more than 1,000 years before this little event that took place in Bethlehem in a manger. We go all the way back to the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is named after Joshua, the leader of Israel. If you know anything about Israel, Israel had been this amazing nation that was extracted from Egypt. God delivers them. He provides for them. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years. God provides all the stuff that they need for 40 years. Moses dies, and now Joshua is taking over the leadership role. They're about to enter the land that God wanted to give them, that God called the Promised Land. And all they had to do to get to the Promised Land was cross the Jordan River. Oh yeah. One more thing. There was a city right on the other side of the Jordan River that they had to deal with. And the city's name was Jericho. You've grown up in the church, you know the song, you know the Sunday school lesson. You can remember this whole episode. It dealt with the city of Jericho. And it wasn't that Jericho was not that big. In fact, the land area of Jericho was about the same size as the property our church occupies right here. And so the city wasn't that large, but around the city were these walls that made the city appear impenetrable, unconquerable. And Joshua knows before we go into the Promised Land, we have to deal with that over there. In fact, they say the walls were so wide you could have a chariot race on top. It looked very intimidating, I'm sure. And so Joshua says, we need to know what we're dealing with. And so Joshua, in Joshua chapter 2, verse number 1, he sends a couple of guys ahead, and he says, I want you to go scout the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. And so 2 men set out, and so they get to Jericho, and they come to the house of a prostitute. And her name was Rahab. And they stayed there the night. These 2 good Israeli boys coming from Joshua's camp, God's chosen people. They cross the Jordan River, and the gates of the city are open, and they kind of wander in. And where do they? They're at Rahab's house. One would wonder why they get to Rahab's house. Well, maybe there was something about her house, maybe something about just her lifestyle that would make it easy to go there incognito. I mean, plenty of strangers went in and out of Rahab's house. And we could stay there and nobody would be the wiser. Well, so they spend the night at Rahab, the prostitute's house. Rahab, the woman with a label. Rahab, the prostitute. The woman with the label. The story goes on in verse number 2. There's a tattletale there, verse number 2. Somebody told the king of Jericho, hey, there's some Israelites. They've come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king, he counters that with what he says in verse number 3. The king of Jericho, then he sent orders to Rahab. He says, bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out this whole land. Rahab had an interesting response. Verse number 4. Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but this is what she says to the king. Not the neighbor, the king. She says, yeah, the men, they were here earlier, but I didn't even know where they were from. Lie. Look what she does in the next verse. I think they left town at dusk as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. Lie. So she's not just a prostitute, she's a lying prostitute. Story goes on, verse number 7. So the king's men, they went looking for the spies along the road leading to the shallow crossings of the Jordan River. And as soon as the king's men had left, the gates of Jericho were shut. So the king's men, they leave, and Rahab has these 2 Israelis in her house. Her house is built into the thick, wide walls of the city of Jericho. She takes the 2 men up to the roof. She hides them under some flax or some grain up there until the coast is clear. And the guys that are looking for them, they're now out of town. They've wandered away, and Rahab had noticed something. You see, God had a reputation. Israel had a reputation. Rahab had heard about the things that God had done. She heard about the parting of the Red Sea. She heard about how God provided food for them, and their clothes didn't wear out, and he put shade over them during the day and gave them fire at night to protect them from other people and animals and all that. She heard about this stuff. And something's going on inside of Rahab, the prostitute, the woman with a label. And I think Rahab wants a piece of that action. She wants out of this lifestyle. She wants the label of prostitute removed from her moniker. And so she makes a deal with the two spies. The story goes on in verse number 12. She says, "Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family since I have helped you." I scratched your back, you scratched mine. Verse number 13, give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, she knew the reputation of God and the Israeli army. Wherever these people go, they just swallow up the land. There's nothing too difficult for their God. So I need a guarantee when Jericho is conquered that you'll let me live along with my father and mother, brothers, sisters, and all my family. Two spies say, well, we promise, we promise, we promise. And then verse 15 says, then since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, she let them down by a rope through the window. Wouldn't this make a great movie? There's suspense in the music. And they wait until nightfall. And a rope is let down, and they have to be a little quiet about what they do. Oh, there's other homes built into that wall. They wait until the opportunity is just right. A little more conversation before they go, however. She says in verse 16, escape to the hill country, hide there for 3 days from the men searching for you, and then when you have returned, you can go your way. Rahab knows enough about how the king operates. She'll send guys out to look for you for 3 days. After 3 days, if they haven't found you, they'll just quit and come back home. So just go hang out there for a little bit. But verse 17 says that before the men left, they said, you know what, we will be bound by an oath that we've taken only if you follow these instructions. Now listen carefully, Rahab. Verse 18, when we come into the land, you must leave this scarlet cord. We don't know what the scarlet cord was for. We don't know if it bound to the provisions. We don't know if it was something they had hanging around their neck, but they had to have some sort of a sign. And they take this red cord. Oh, it has such great spiritual significance, even into the New Testament. That's a whole other sermon. But they say, you've got to hang this cord in your window. You've got to hang it here. Leave the scarlet cord, hang in there in the window so that when we come back, we'll see that cord. But it's got to be hanging. And exactly what happened. Joshua, the leader of Israel, he gets all the people together. Can you imagine speaking to the masses of Israel? 1 million strong, maybe 2 million strong. There was a lot of people there. And he says, all right, hey guys, you see that big city over there? Here's what we're going to do. Now, just listen to me. It's imperative that you listen closely to my directions. We're going to go tomorrow morning. We're going to get up and we're going to go march around that city. Now, here's what we're going to do. You priests, you carry the Ark of the Covenant, this gold box that held some very important items inside and bore the presence of God. You're going to carry that, and then you priests, you get the ram's horn, the shofar, and you're just going to keep blowing these trumpets the whole time, and the rest of you just don't say a word. Zip a lip. Right, ready? You got that? We got it. Next morning comes, they all get up. Now, I want you to think about this. Maybe as you've heard the story, you can just see the people marching right around the walls of Jericho. Well, if Jericho was no bigger than this property, you try to put 1 or 2 million people around. That's a crowd. And it would be just strategically nonsensical to march that close to the wall because somebody might drop a rock on your head, shoot you with an arrow. I'm thinking that they made this huge circle Oh, it spanned a long ways between this huge circle of people. They start walking around Jericho. I would imagine it took them a long time to start walking around Jericho, not saying a word. And while they're on the outside walking this circle around Jericho, in my mind's eye, I see Rahab at her window, at the same one through which she let down the 2 spies. She sees the people all around as far as she can see from her vantage point. I wonder what God's going to do here. The rest of the city is watching this going, freaky, weird. And I think in Rahab's mind, she's thinking, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that there's a God of Israel who's going to deliver me. And while the city is in doom and despair, thinking their destruction is coming, I think Rahab is thinking, my freedom is about to come. Well, they do this for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, Joshua says, all right, we're going to change it up a little bit. Good, because it's kind of boring, just walking and saying nothing. No. This time, we're going to walk around the city 7 times. And when you get around there the 7th time, I want you to shout as loud as you possibly can. So they did, and they get around to the 7th time. The trumpets are blasted, and all of a sudden, people just, and the walls came down. You all been Sunday school, I love that. In fact, archaeologists have excavated the site, and they say it looks like the walls just went straight down into the ground. Yeah, and that's what happened. And Rahab and all her family is inside this little room. Took the elevator up to the roof, and they were set free. In fact, in chapter 6, verse number 25, it says that Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, the lying prostitute, and her relatives who were with her in the house because she had hidden the spies Joshua sent to Jericho. And then I love this, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. And then there's another little episode that we don't have the details of how this happened. So the walls of Jericho came down, Rahab and her family, they're all spared, and life kind of starts to move on normally. I would imagine that one day Rahab shows up at a coffee shop, and she's ordering her coffee, and there was a man sitting at the table, and it's a pretty big community of people. He didn't know everybody. He'd never seen this woman before, and her clothing is a little bit different than ours. In fact, she was Canaanite, I think, and we're Israelite. Boy, she's pretty. So he walks up to the counter and says, I'll take care of this, and puts a couple shekels out there and buys her coffee, and they start a conversation. He's nice to look at. He's gentle and nice. And a conversation started. And Rahab and this guy go out for a second date and a third. In fact, here's what we know happens. We have a little bit more details about their life more than 1,500 years later when a guy named Matthew writes about them. And in Matthew chapter 1, verse number 5, it mentions this man's name that met Rahab. His name was Solomon. And Solomon, he became a father of a guy named Boaz. And then in parentheses, Matthew says, whose mother was Rahab. And you know what's remarkable about that passage that is before your eyes this morning? You notice that the label is gone. That something happened in Rahab's heart. That Rahab became a different woman. That suddenly her identity changed. And when her identity changed, and when she realized who God was, suddenly the label fell off, and she wasn't Rahab the prostitute now, she was Rahab. What's even more amazing is that 4 verses prior to this verse, it says in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, that this is the record of the ancestors of Jesus, the Messiah. This woman named Rahab, the lying prostitute, is in the lineage, in the ancestry of Jesus himself. And I love the fact that there's somebody in the story who's so much like you and so much like me, not just maybe in behavior, but somebody that had a label. And you know, the point of Christmas is this, that Jesus stepped into the world to remove labels. That Jesus stepped into the world to come after people like you, to come after people like me. People who have worn a label their entire life. We've maybe never verbalized the label. People don't know what the label, but we know what the label is. And Jesus comes in to remove that label from us. The love of God that she accepted. She accepted the unconditional love of God. If you would accept the unconditional love of God, it would start to remove some labels from you as well. That the labels don't stick when the love of Jesus is all over your body. I thought of some labels that we wear sometimes. Maybe you don't wear these labels, but you know people that wear these labels. You go to school with these people. You go to work with these people. They're in the apartment next to you. They're in the trailer next to you. They're in the house next to you. And they have a label. Oh, nobody knows the label. You kind of suspect you know what the label is if you get to know them. But they know what the label is. And they wear labels that say things like abused or abuser or failure or fat or ugly or worthless, loser, stupid, addict, alcoholic, hopeless. And it's for these things that Jesus came. It's for these labels that Jesus came, to remove those labels altogether. I love what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. He says, when we come to faith in Christ Jesus, the old is gone. He rips off the label. I mean, there's not even a lick of residue or glue, or there's nothing left behind. He removes that label. The old is gone and the new has come. That's the Jesus that I know. And how is it? You ask yourself, how is it that a lying prostitute can be in the story of Christmas? I love that. Is it possible that he loves us so much that he finds us worth giving his son Jesus? And I think that's exactly what it is. There's Christmas because Jesus came to this earth, this messy, messy earth, to untangle the mess of Christmas, to untangle the mess of your life through Jesus and the love that Jesus offers to all of us. For some people just like you and just like me, Jesus stepped into this world. And then, you know what I love? When Jesus came to this world, Jesus started writing out some new labels. Jesus found you. He gets out his labels, and Jesus, like me, has a pen in his pocket. Always carries a pen with him. Gets his labels and he looks at you. He starts to write on a piece of paper, I got a new label for you. Redeemed. Reclaimed. Accepted. Loved. Forgiven. Can't forget that one. And then finally, he says, masterpiece. And those are the labels that Jesus puts on us when we say yes to him. It's those labels that he puts on there, and nobody can strip that label off. You know what I love about this? If you want something truly bad enough, you will sacrifice to get it. Some of you right now are sacrificing time and effort and energy to buy a house. Some of you have sacrificed to have children. Some of you have sacrificed in order to have a certain possession, to buy a car, to have an education. You make sacrifices. If you want something bad enough, you make a sacrifice for it. Now think about this. God wanted you so bad, he sacrificed Jesus for you. That's how much he wanted you. He wanted you so much he was willing to sacrifice for you. If you know what it is to sacrifice to gain something else, the reason that Jesus came at Christmas time, it was God's offering of sacrifice to get you back. Because he wants you back so that he can strip off the labels and put a new label on there, the ones that matter the most to all of us. Just imagine for just a moment if people that you know people that are wearing labels that are painful labels. Hurtful labels. What if those labels started to peel away, strip away? Can you imagine how their lives would be changed? you imagine the joy that they would start to feel? Can you imagine the purpose that they would begin to feel? Now, here's what I've discovered. Some people have trouble letting those labels be removed because they have trouble believing the label that Jesus writes and wants to put on them. People have a hard time believing that they're forgiven, that they're reclaimed and redeemed and loved and a masterpiece. But the moment you start to believe what's written on those labels, it makes it so easy for the other ones to come off. Imagine if friends and family would just begin to know that they are loved by Him. You see, the point of the Christmas story is that Jesus stepped into this messy earth to die and sacrifice Himself for people like the ones in His family tree, like Rahab. And at some point when Rahab accepted the love of God, it changed the label that Rahab wore. And it could be the same for you and me if we will just accept the love that Jesus has for us. Can you do that with me today? Let's pray.